Hey guys, in today's video we're going to be comparing the Fuji 16mm 1.4 to the 16mm 2.8. It is early morning. Too early. I hate early. This is not my thing. But yesterday I had this brilliant idea that I was going to get out this morning and be all landscape vloggy. That sounded like a really good idea at 5 p.m. yesterday. 5 a.m. today, not so much. But here we are. Today we're going to answer one of the most common gear-related questions that I've been getting lately, and that is how does this lens, the 16mm 1.4, compare to the 16mm 2.8? So that's why we're here at this beautiful location to intro, just to get a teaser of what I can get with these two lenses, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty. But first of all, you need to know, when it comes to this lens right here, the 16-1.4 is my absolute favorite lens that I've ever shot with, ever. Having said that, I do have an open relationship with this lens. It is a relationship I've developed over the years through mutual trust and respect, but I'm also willing to experiment with other lenses. So we'll give the 2.8 a shot, see how it compares. It definitely has some strengths that maybe this doesn't have, and it definitely is the right lens for certain people. So we'll get into all that. But for those of you who are here, not really wanting to watch a big old comparison video of me just talking and showing you photos and stuff, you know, you can go ahead and pause the video and I'll give you the brief, too long didn't watch summary right now. But for everybody else, let's go ahead and take a shot here, compare those, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty. Let's take this photo. All right, well that was fun, but let's be honest, you're probably not gonna look at these prime lenses if you're a serious landscape photographer, at least not as your primary go-to lens. So let's take a deep dive into what aspects of these lenses will most likely matter to someone who is looking for a prime lens of this focal length. And while most people will want to talk image quality first, I actually don't want to do that because my own controversial opinion here is that image quality is important, but only to a point. And once you get to a certain acceptable level of image quality, after that, there's a lot of other factors that I think matter significantly more when it comes to which lens is going to work best for you. So I'll be speaking about the quality of these lenses in the order of appearance that they personally matter most to me. You may have a different set of priorities, but this is my review, so we'll follow my hierarchy of needs. And the first thing that matters a lot to me when I'm shooting with a wide lens like this is actually low light capability. The reason I love the 16mm APS-C field of view or the 24mm field of view if I'm shooting full frame or 35mm film is actually for indoor documentary style photography. And the reason I love this field of view is because a lot of times what you want to document is just as much about the environment as it is the subject. Not to mention the simple fact that often you're constrained by tight spaces. So that field of view is the obvious choice for those situations. But that also means that quite often anyway, I am constrained by how much light I have to work with, and having the ability to go all the way down to a 1.4 aperture is extremely helpful. A 2.8 aperture, on the other hand, while not the end of the world, for indoor situations, especially on an APS-C camera, it's not always ideal. And when I first heard the announcement that this would be a 2.8 lens, not an f2 lens, like the other f2 prime lens series that Fuji has been doing previously, I was really disappointed. But one thing you do benefit as a result of that 2.8 aperture is a tiny package. One of the smallest Fuji lenses that I really love to use for shoot around or even for street is the 35mm f2 because it's just so inconspicuous and compact. But this little tiny 16-2.8 is actually almost identical as far as size. And the only Fuji lens that beats these two is the 27-2.8 pancake lens. But that lens doesn't have an aperture ring like these ones do. So when it comes to street photography, which is my next most favorite time to bust out that 16mm focal length, there's no question of which of these lenses I prefer. It's gonna be the 2.8 every time. Shooting with the X-T3 and this tiny 16mm 2.8 last time I was in San Francisco was an absolute pleasure. It's a great combination. The 16-1.4 on the other hand, it's just a bit of the beast and it's a lot more conspicuous. But before we go too far down the feature and specs path, we should probably mention the price. At a difference of $500 between these two lenses, you really do pay for that extra stop and a half of glass on the 1.4. And of course, $500 question is it worth it? So we already mentioned the greater light gathering ability that this has. If you're a wedding photographer or a professional documentary photographer or just a dad with expendable income, the answer I have for you is straight away is yeah, I think it's worth it. But before you go out and lay all that hard-earned cash down on the table, let's cover the rest of the interesting differences between these lenses. While in most of the other cases between the f2 Fuji primes and the faster equivalent primes, the f2 versions are weather sealed, while the 1.2 or the 1.4 versions are not. The 16-1.4 breaks this pattern. Both of these lenses do have weather resistance, which is really nice. But another thing that I really appreciate about the 16-1.4 is the awesome, really close focus and or reproduction ratio. If you've watched any of my videos about the 16-1.4, you know how much I love shooting small details with this lens. At a reproduction ratio of 1:5, which means that objects roughly the same width of the Fuji APS-C sensor will appear 1/5 of the total width of the frame, you really can get tight on details. The 16-2.8 is it's more average with a reproduction ratio of 1:8. Not everyone will see this as a significant limitation in this lens, but for me, it's sort of a deal breaker. And another factor that really goes hand in hand with that close focus ability is the bokeh quality and the shallow depth of field ability of the 16-1.4. While I've gone on record saying that bokeh is overrated, when you need it, you need it. And the 16-1.4 definitely delivers in a big way, certainly more so than the 16-2.8. When it comes to sharpness, I always have to give the disclaimer that even modern lenses exhibit lens variance, and that just means that every lens is going to be slightly different when it comes to detail rendering and sharpness. I'll still show you what I see in my comparison tests, but I hope you only use this as anecdotal and see what others are reporting as well. Look for patterns in reviews. Don't just take any one reviewer's word for it, or you may be misled. Now with my two copies, the 2.8 lens is sharper than the 1.4. Now, whenever I report to our viewers that one of the Fuji f2 series lenses is sharper at similar apertures than the equivalent faster prime Fuji lenses, I always get people saying I'm insane, that there's no possible way that their beloved and more expensive faster prime sibling is softer than the f2 equivalent. So I'm almost loath to tell you that this is what I'm seeing. Not looking forward to all the whining I'm gonna get in the comments. But guys, the 2.8, my 2.8 overall is more sharp than my 1.4. The exception here is after f8 where the 1.4 appears sharper at the edges than my 2.8. But throughout most of the aperture ranges below 5.6, in the corners and even in the center a little bit, I can tell a difference. The 2.8 is undeniably sharper. Now this very well could be due to the fact that I have used this 16-1.4 more than any of the other lenses that I own over the past 3 years. Maybe it's just off kilter. Again, look for patterns in other reviewers. Don't just take my word for this. And for any of you out there who happen to have both of these lenses in your arsenal, I would be extremely curious to see a side-by-side detail shot from you. If anyone else can test this, I will pin your comment below for everyone else to get another data point. Please let me know. When it comes to colors, I definitely have seen a difference in the past between the Fuji faster primes and their f2 brothers. For instance, the 50 f2 has more yellow in the skin tones than the 56 1.2. But in the case of these two, I can really see no noticeable color difference in any of the direct comparison samples. The only thing you could maybe say is that the 2.8 is a smidge more contrasty in general than the 16 1.4. So now we start to get to the little tiny things that probably aren't going to make or break a buying decision, but that I really feel are worth mentioning. And one of these things is manual focus. I know most people buying these lenses are rarely going to be manually focusing, but if you're one of the rare individuals who does a ton of manual focus work like I do, you're going to be much, much happier with the 16 1.4 with that really nice clutch focus ability. It does have focus by wire, but at least it has a place to stop at the edges, whereas with the 16 1.4, it's an infinite focus by wire, meaning it just turns forever. And moreover, it's just a dismal manual focus experience. The ring is very small. And when you have the lens hood mounted, the space for your fingers to get in there and control the focus ring is quite tiny. Another small thing to note is that the aperture range is different. We already mentioned that these aren't necessarily the first lenses you pick up if you're doing landscape, but if you are doing landscape, one thing to note about the 2.8 that's nice, it's not only is it nice to pack around because it's small, but it also goes up to f22, whereas the 16 1.4 does not. It goes up to f16. Now, many will argue that you don't want to go to f22 in landscape as it will introduce some diffraction and extra softness, but there have been times where being able to go to f22 has been helpful to me personally. For instance, times where I forget to bring along my ND filter. The next thing on our list is the dark and sinister truth that I wish I didn't have to report. This is something that has been covered up, a dark secret that Fuji doesn't want you to know about, something you'd expect to hear on camera conspiracies or something like that. And that is that this lens, the 16-2.8, is not actually a 16mm focal length. I'd say it's actually closer to 15mm. As you can see from these comparisons, the 16-1.4, which I verified next to 24mm focal length full frame lenses, they are nearly exactly the same. But as you can see, the 16-2.8 is wider. I think the Fuji is liberally rounding up to 16mm for marketing purposes. So if you buy this lens, you're buying a lie. But then we get to the final category of comparison that I want to talk about, and that is video capability of these lenses. With that slightly wider focal length that I just mentioned, as well as the small size and also really quiet focus, I actually like this 2.8 lens a lot for vlogging. It's really nice. It works really well. The 16-1.4, on the other hand, is not as easy to handhold. It's not as wide, and unfortunately, it's a very loud focuser. It's not great for vlogging. It's got a lot of glass on there that has to crank around, and that's going to lead to some noise, in-camera noise, if you are doing sound on or in camera. And in fact, even lapel mics will often pick it up because a lens like this is just going to be pretty close to your face. When it comes to gimbal work, I also really love the 16-2.8, although both work great, but with that light and compact size, it really was something that I used a lot at the last event I shot with. I kept it on my X-T2 on a gimbal almost the whole time, and I loved it. On the other hand, to complicate things more, the 16-1.4 exhibits no focus breathing, which is nice for video, but the 16-2.8 does, so that's something to note. But guys, that's all I really want to say about these two lenses. They're both great. If you don't need low light or shallow depth of field, I'd say that you should save yourself $500 and get this super high quality 15mm 2.8 lens. As for me, I'm probably going to keep both. I'm hanging on to the hopes that Fuji will eventually give us some stabilized cameras with fully articulating screens, in which case this lens will serve me very well as a vlogging lens. In the meantime though, I also really love using it on the street, out of doors with a family, and on a gimbal at events with videography. So I'll hang on to it, but if push came to shove, maybe a zombie apocalypse and I had to leave one of them behind, I think we all know which one I'd keep. But that's all for now, guys. I really hope you found something helpful here. I wish you all the best in your lens buying decisions. And as always, please do remember that kindness matters more than cameras. Talk to you again real soon.